Hello, it's the Pain Points podcast from Mindtools. I'm Jonathan Hancock, and every week for the last couple of years, I've been exploring ways to make work better, talking to experts with experience, insight, and advice to share. The idea is that we take on the tough stuff of working life together and improve ourselves, our teams, and our organisations one pain point at a time. This week, the challenges that managers face to support learning in their teams. We know from what you've told us that this can be difficult. You've got L&D initiatives coming down from on high, but are they worth anything? And won't they just get in the way of all the other stuff you're trying to achieve? The people you manage have such varied ideas about learning. Some are desperate to go on expensive courses. Others don't want to learn anything. They just want you to fix everything. And some don't really know what they should do to develop themselves and their careers. And what about your own learning? How do you prioritise that when you're too busy to get everything else done? Managers can get stuck in the middle of well-meaning learning initiatives and on-the-ground needs and struggle to know which way to look and what their role really is. Well, at least until now, because we're going to unpick all of this today. Position managers to support learning, explain how they can tell if it's working, and even find space to learn and develop themselves. This is Pain Points. What's managing got to do with learning? And my guest today is someone with plenty of experience with these problems. Carl Akintola is the head of learning and development at the ICAEW, the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales. Carl Akintola, a very warm welcome to Pain Points.
Thank you, Jonathan. Very good to be with you.
And as someone who heads up learning and development, let's get right into this. Where do managers figure in your plans?
Well, it's good. When you asked me to come on this podcast, and the first thing I thought was, do you know what? I probably haven't done enough to integrate managers into my plan. So it was good. It was good thinking for me. But I do think that a good place to start here is thinking about, kind of what we mean by learning, because I think learning does crop up in a number of guises from a manager's perspective and from colleagues' perspective. I'm thinking of Janet, who's a member of, the finance team, and all of the ways that learning might crop up with regard to Janet. So it might be, Janet's just joined and it's week one and she needs to know where to save stuff in the shared drive. And I think from a manager's perspective, that is learning, but they might not think of that as learning. And it's the kind of thing they're just going to sort that out. They're going to get involved with that because that's stopping them from an immediate issue that could arise. Then there's sort of Janet asking, can I go on a course or can I do this, particularly if it involves money? That will sort of trigger another kind of set of mindsets potentially for the manager. Yes. There's some kind of performance problem that Janet might be experiencing, and again, the manager may or may not think of that as learning or an opportunity to learn. Janet gets an email from HR saying, "Can you go on a talent development program? You've been selected." Yes. Again, that's a different kind of thing. So all of these things, I think, will trigger different responses or perhaps need a different response from the manager, but they're all learning related. So I think that's probably the first place to start.
Yes. So a lot of how that plays out there must depend on the manager and how they see learning and development from the way they've been managed, or let's hope because of some very good help from L&D above them. Maybe they're brilliantly supported. And in the ideal world, I suppose they then know exactly what to do. But we don't live in an ideal world, do we? I hear lots of stories of managers who feel a bit separate from L&D, like there's this world of sort of possibilities, but also requests that are coming down towards them, and they're being given initiatives, and that gets in the way of the day-to-day work where they maybe feel they could be helping with learning, but actually they've got to fend that off because they've got to get on with more pressing needs. So there's a disconnect quite often between managers and L&D up there in the distance somewhere.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think in L&D, and I think HR generally, we're often sitting around sort of, not being particularly complimentary about managers and the managers are the problem and so on. And I often think that managers' responses are entirely rational. So if Janet is being signed up for some program, it's entirely rational for the manager who has been given, goals to achieve and things to do, to say, well, how is that helping me or indeed us? Now, how is that helping our team that I'm going to lose Janet for X hours, days, whatever it may be, and I'm then being asked to integrate this learning into when Janet comes back, even though I've had no say in the fact that Janet's going on a course at all or what she's being asked to do. I don't know the content. I don't know all of these things. So I think there's a real lesson for L&D folk, frankly, to involve managers more and to think about managers more, because they are a key person in this whole equation.
Yes.
And if managers are kicking back in the circumstances I've described, I think, well, we're getting what we ask for, frankly, in L&D.
So is it often a case of just leaving people out of the loop, that very well-meaning L&D departments will just not tell managers what they're thinking and not ask managers what the manager knows about?
Yes, I mean, there is always an issue when you are scaling. So if you are in L&D and for whatever reasons, good and bad, you are producing initiatives at scale, then there's just a reality that there's only so much you're going to be able to do with Janet's manager, in terms of checking that what you're doing is going to be meeting their needs and making sure they're up to date and so on. Now, that doesn't mean to say that we always do a great job, because I know I certainly haven't done in the past, do a great job of keeping the Janet managers up to date, as it were. But there is a reality there, and there's also, I think, a risk that when you are scaling, the problems that you are addressing in an organization start to average out.
Yes.
And the more average the problems are you're addressing, then the least they apply to any one individual circumstance. And so the more likely you are that Janet's manager is going to think, well, what's this all about? That doesn't even apply here.
Okay, so we've been trying to see things through the eyes of the manager, and we'll do as much of that as we can today and be realistic. But also, let's give L&D credit. There are things that they know about and that they can see that the managers on the ground can't see.
Yes, I think that's right. The best manager will probably be, in this respect, the best manager in this respect is probably going to take on board a lot of the things that the best L&D folk take on board, and indeed vice versa. So there are still L&D folk out there who I would say is, perhaps not really effective, and they think of learning as just as courses, and when somebody makes a request, it's just like, okay, what's the best thing in my catalog, basically. Yes. And vice versa, when they're thinking about supporting the organization, it's just about courses, and then I'll just put my wares in the shop window and hope for the best. And similarly, the worst kind of manager, as it were, in this respect, when Janet says, can I go on that Excel course, they will think of learning in the same way, almost a bit like it's part of the rewards package in the organization. It's like it's not something that's about performance. It's a bit like the cycle to work scheme or a volunteers day or something like that.
Yeah, and almost in my experience, sometimes it's like, well, just do that as a treat.
Absolutely.
And that will get this idea of learning out of your system and get back to work.
It's something I've got to sort of tolerate, or it's maybe it's a moment where I can feel good about myself because I get to sign the check, that allows you to do that. And so it's very much the whole kind of mindset is reward. And with that mindset, again, I think it's entirely rational in as far as if I'm a manager and I'm regarding learning as a bit like a volunteers day, go off and do that. Well, why would I want to follow up in great detail and talk to Janet in a one-to-one and so on? It's like, it's not my thing, it's her thing, it's her volunteers day, so it makes sense for me to regard it as something that is Janet's thing or HR's thing. So I think that's the first thing is that what we can do is in L&D to help managers is to think, what's the mindset you're approaching with learning, and that first and foremost, just like with a really good L&D practitioner, we should be thinking not about what's my catalogue of courses, but how can we help Janet perform, and what can we do? And there's a huge number of things that we can do to help Janet perform, a lot of which have got nothing to do with learning, frankly, and even the ones that they have got nothing to do with courses. And so there's lots of things that we could do. And suddenly, I think in looking at that way, I've got more options that take less time, that take less or no money, and that can be genuinely helpful. And that I can see, okay, this is solving a problem, not only for Janet, but for me, because we're making quick progress, relevant progress. The time is not huge, and the time we're spending is really focused on something that we know that needs fixing. Yes. So all of those things, I think, can really help a manager.
Yes, and you mentioned there are things that we know need fixing. And if we, again, go back to the L&D team, they've possibly been given an insight into what the organization needs. And so they've built a program and set up this initiative. And they've got to get that across to the manager for the manager to be their ambassador and to roll it out properly.
Yeah.
But again, in my experience, that doesn't always happen. And they may have all sorts of information about what's really important for the manager, for the people in their team, so that the organization achieves its goals. But that message gets lost.
I find it's a really interesting dynamic. I often think about this in terms of retail L&D and enterprise L&D. And so I think, retail L&D, which is where, as an L&D person, I'm going straight to Janet. I'm like, it's all I'm doing is I'm just trying to sell her stuff,
Yes.
and I'm trying to book her on, get her to book on my courses, or my, look at my digital content online, or whatever it may be. And enterprise L&D is I'm working with the managers and leaders to think about, okay, what's the strategy? How can we help? How can we, contribute in our corner of learning to the strategy? Now, I think the enterprise approach is right, and that's kind of where I think the modern L&D professional should be. But ultimately, Janet needs to be involved. It's all very well me talking with managers, but ultimately, if there's learning got to happen on the ground floor, then we've got to get people involved with that. And so that's where it can fall down. And so we can be consulting, really deep, meaningful ways and coming up with all kinds of insights into the organization and so on, but which still is not touching the ground level Janet and her manager. And so we need to make sure, as enterprise L&D folk, as it were, if I can use that term, that we are still connecting the reality. And that means, I think, developing initiatives which allow for tailoring, which allow for flexibility, which give some scope for the manager to make it relevant in their world, that it's not super fixed as far as possible. But that's a lot of things to juggle for L&D folk.
Yes, and a lot for the manager as well, because that can sound like a whole other aspect of their already very busy life if they're also being asked to be the L&D team's person on the ground and to be asking all these L&D related questions. And they're also being given all these other impossible sounding targets all the time, and more issues are arising. How do they juggle all of that? Yeah,
and it is a challenge, isn't it? Because a lot of these, talent programs are a classic case where really, as a manager, if I think about this in terms of solving problems, this is not solving my problem. Janet going on a talent program is not solving any problem for me. It is giving me problems in the short term, frankly, because she's not here, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's asking me as a manager to have a very kind of broad corporate enterprise mindset where I'm saying, for the greater good, I'm going to encourage Janet to do this and so on and so forth. But it doesn't help me with any of the things I'm probably going to be compared with at the end of the year in terms of targets and standards and so on. So I think it really does require a stretch for a manager. And the really, great managers, frankly, just because of their own values, will be in that space. They'll see that they have a corporate role as well as a narrow functional role, and they can play in that space. But in L&D, we really need to recognize that with those sorts of big corporate enterprise initiatives, we are often in competition with managers for their time.
Yes.
And we need to up our game, I think, certainly I do, in terms of recognizing that and making what we are presenting as palatable and relevant as possible.
But it sounds like there's so much value to be gained here if we can get this right, because in this ideal world, the manager is there on the ground, knows what the problems are, and can see, go back to Janet, we can see her from day one. The manager is there noticing all the things that she might not have noticed herself, as well as listening to the things that she says she wants to do, because we know what it's like. People come with a mixture of things that they want to do, but then maybe suddenly realize they've got to get some information about something or build a particular skill, and there are things that other people have to notice that they're struggling with or just know that they could benefit from. So the manager could be the perfect person to negotiate all of that, to see a way forward, and then liaise with L&D, and together they could come up with this grand plan that would work brilliantly for Janet, for the team, and also for the organisation, because it would fit in with what L&D are trying to do for everyone.
Absolutely.
That's a great ideal world. That's
isn't it? It is an ideal world, isn't it? Yeah.
I want to live there.
What it does point to, I think, is good managers, when they're working with L&D, will be kind of greedy, that they will not be there just sort of obediently rolling out whatever comes into their inbox from L&D or did any other function of central function. They will be reaching out, making connections, seeing who it is in L&D who can help them on their terms, and be the kind of person who might be, because of the relationship you form early, could be the kind of person that L&D reaches out to say, oh, we've got this idea.
Yes.
Well, guess what? I can, put my 2 pennies in nice and early, even if it's one of these kind of average programs where they're not going to reach out to every manager. Well, if I've got a good relationship with L&D, that's going to be me. And so the average is going to tilt towards me a bit more than it will be the people who are just waiting for the initiatives to land. So I think, yes, to be kind of proactive and to get the most out of L&D possible, and not just be a shopper or indeed, just kind of, like waiting for the bomb to drop.
Yes. And what's it like when this works? We've talked about problems, but let's be positive for a few minutes at least and talk about when this has actually worked in your experience. Have you seen this when there's been a good connection, the communications have been good, the relationships have been good, and it has worked?
Yeah, I've had some very, very profitable relationships with managers, and they do tend to be people, and this is obviously just in my experience, who on the one hand give, so they are available and will give their time and will be the people who put their hands up and say, well, yes, we'll trial that, or we'll do a pilot of that, and we'll share stuff with you and so on. But also, and maybe because of that, they are also takers. They will challenge.
Yes.
They'll have earned the right through that first bunch of stuff I was talking about to challenge and to steer and to say, actually, I don't want to be involved in that. I want something more like this. As ever, in any organization, it's all about relationships and connection, and having that connection with L&D, proactively. I think our managers are in a place to give themselves the best, and I've certainly come across people who've done that. And you always feel when one of those kind of people is on the phone that you're willing, and indeed perhaps you have to go the extra mile for them, do the kind of the one-off thing for them that you perhaps wouldn't do for someone else, because they have earned it as one of your partners in the business.
Yes. And how much do you think L&D teams should be thinking about training up managers to be the people that L&D want them to be their ambassadors and to have the right conversations and that kind of thing?
That's a really good question. I've often thought, but I've never really done anything with this thought. I've often thought that if you think about finance and marketing and these other kind of central functions, procurement, that they by and large don't tell you what money to spend or what to market or what to buy and so on. They tell you the how. They tell you the best, the most efficient ways, the most effective ways and so on. They make it happen for you, but you're in charge of the content. And there's a funny thing with learning is that sort of we've taken charge of the content as well. We're suddenly the people who produce the management standards and the content for the psychological safety course or whatever. And I just wondered if we were more like our other central functions colleagues, that we would focus more on, okay, forget about what you want to learn. I'm here to help you how to learn. And sometimes that happens. I had a conversation just this week with somebody in our brand team who was interested to learn about how I can become a new manager, and her entry point was, what courses have you got? And we were able to talk over the space of 20 minutes. I was able to give her quite a lot of things that she could do that she'd never thought of before. And in some ways, they were all kind of quite generic things to do with, the existing relationships she had, or how she could sort of use people on social media, et cetera, et cetera. And those kinds of ways of learning, I hope now, are things that she would apply to other content, in her life. So hopefully equipped her to be a slightly better learner. So I do think there's mileage in that, but I don't see a lot of appetite for that in businesses, if I'm honest. So it's maybe a pipe dream of mine, frankly.
Well, you've got lots of managers listening now. So from an L&D point of view, are there things that you could tell them to do better, differently? Could you kind of coach them in a few minutes now? Use this opportunity. What would you like them to do? Let's be positive, to do more of, for example, to be better from an L&D point of view, to do their learning role better?
I mean, and the sort of tempting response to that as someone at L&D is to still think about the kind of course paradigm, and then therefore the answer would be, make sure that you prep Janet before she goes on a course, and make sure you talk about it in a one-to-one, and that you give her opportunities to practice and so on. And that's kind of fair enough, but it does strike me that's I don't know, it feels a bit lame. And if I was a manager, as I often am, as a manager, not just an L&D person, I kind of want to say, take control of your learning. And that means be really focused on performance and be really targeted about the activities that you and your team colleagues do that will get you to performance. And that often means, for a lot of people, it's getting better, but a lot of people, that means don't think about learning as kind of adult school.
Yes.
Learning is much broader than that. And think about all the things you could do to get you from A to B, where B is where you want to be. And often it's that kind of adult school way of thinking of things that mysteriously appears when we enter the workplace. And if you're at home, you wouldn't think twice about going on YouTube or asking a friend or all these kinds of things. All those things still apply in the workplace. So that would be my sense. And then with L&D as the more formal role, I'd say, reach out, have a connection, and then be greedy. Get them to work for you. Find the person who's going to be really helpful for solving your problems, not just you being a passive recipient of whatever's trundling out of HR today.
Yes. Yeah. And do you think managers need to just get a bit tougher sometimes and better at saying no when people say, I want to go on this course, I'll go away, I'll stop bothering you if you sign me up for this learning?
Yeah, I think that is right. Yes. And that comes into that whole area of, being focused on performance and then having a conversation with Janet, whose entry line is, I want to go on a course. And you think, okay, great. Let's think about what's the problem you're trying to solve here. And let's think about the best, quickest, most effective way that we can get there. And if that's a course, I'm all up for it. Yes. But let's at least have that conversation first, because often there are things that will get you all of the way or some of the way, as I say, quicker, cheaper, more effectively. And why wouldn't you do that?
Yes. And how much are managers useful people to assess the impact of L&D and learning in general?
Very, very good question. It depends is the obvious but probably not very helpful answer. Where you are managing in areas where behavior is very easy to observe, then I think they are better placed than anybody to do that. So if you're a store manager and your staff have just gone on customer training, there they are in front of you with customers. It's like no L&D person is going to get near to that. There will be other things where, a lot of this comes with sort of more knowledge workers where actually you can't really observe people doing things. You may observe the outputs of their work. So, presentation skills, or they've been on, Excel training we've talked about, so that you'll see that maybe the products of those, whatever the content, they are going to be or should be close to the outputs and outcomes of that person's behavior. And so should be a key person for us to be hooking in with, I think. Absolutely.
Yes. And maybe avoid the temptation to focus on things like, did the person enjoy it?
Absolutely. Because as we know, people who know about learning know that often learning isn't often enjoyable. It's
the best learning often isn't.
It involves a bit
Ideally,
of friction.
it would be the best learning would be great.
Yeah.
Just enjoying it doesn't really sell it.
No, and again, if your way of looking at it is the mindset of this is part of the rewards package, it's like your volunteers day, then absolutely. Yeah. What a rational question. Did you enjoy it? But if it's about performance, then it's kind of irrelevant. What's relevant is, did you make progress? Did you acquire knowledge or skills? And are you better at doing what you want to do now?
And in all of this, I suppose we also have to make sure that the manager's learning and development needs are addressed. And I've seen examples of this, and I've probably been guilty of this myself sometimes. You get so busy as a manager and you know how important it is, and you can see the issues that would be better if everyone improved, and you in particular, but you put your own needs right at the bottom and you try and find a bit of time to do it at some point, but that gets lost. So how do we make sure that the manager has enough time to do their learning and development?
Well, the answer that comes to mind, and this may not be applicable for everyone, is that every manager has a manager. Yeah. So if you are able to, if you have this kind of relationship with your manager, and that's a whole other conversation about how you can, get a better relationship with your manager, is to say, I want to be able to develop, and this is not me coming to you saying, I'm going to produce this, £5,000 course I want to go on. I want to get better at this area, or I want you to, to us to have a conversation about what I could get better in. And then I want you to hold me accountable for making progress in this, whatever way. So use the relationship you have with your manager, and also sometimes with your team.
Yes.
For example, if the behavior that you want to get better at, or the area you want to explore is management itself, then use your team. Say I'd like to get better, and I have a sense that I could be better at this. What do you think? Or can you tell me where you think I could improve? And then hold me accountable for doing that. So when I turn up to one-to-ones and I'm prepared, give me feedback and say, yeah, that was great when you were prepared this time, Carl.
Yes.
Whatever the thing may be. So use relationships, I suppose, would be the thing, so that you're not relying solely on your own gumption to get you over the line. You're relying on other people to prod you.
I think this is such a good point, because in my experience, managers can become quite transactional figures if they're not careful, and if people don't sometimes help them be a bit better, because they can have people demanding stuff of them. They can also have their own managers demanding things and maybe just overlooking them as the manager and just looking at what they're getting other people to do, and the manager's own needs can get lost. But like you say, you can just prompt your own people to ask about learning, prompt your manager to check and to hold you accountable for the learning improvement that you're doing as a manager. So I think you can guide conversations quite subtly before you're too busy to get on with it. I think that's the key, isn't it? You can plant these seeds.
I think so. It's probably the sort of generalized case, a member of a generalized case, which is when you've got only urgent things to deal with, you'll never get to the important things.
Yes.
And the thing is, how do you make important things urgent?
Yes.
And that means typically you have to have a system of some kind. So you've got to have a reminder that pops up, or a person who pops into your world or something. And so you have to generate that rather than just relying on you to overcome the urge, which we all have, just to do the next urgent thing, as opposed to I need to get better at that.
Yes.
It's important, but it's not urgent.
Now, at the very start, Carl, you said that having this conversation had made you think about yourself and where maybe you could improve. So what are you going to go off and do differently now as a result of chatting today?
Well, I'm relatively new in role at the Institute, and there is quite a lot to go at. Building on good foundations, but there's a lot to do. And I mean, literally just before, I was thinking about performance management and working with colleagues to potentially transform the way we do performance management. And that is a classic case where I should be, as I believe some people say, eating my own dog food. It's like it should be a case where I am really, walking the walk and making sure that I'm not in my ivory tower, just generating stuff to inflict on people, but actually getting close to managers and saying, what's your experience and what would work, what would help you, that we can do and that I can help you do with your colleagues. So something I was aware of, but it's just really sharpened my focus on that, I think, today. So thank you.
Good. You're welcome. And maybe one thought for the manager listening, because that's the bulk of the audience to this podcast, and I'm sure they've gained a huge amount by listening to the tips and insights that you've given them today. But if there's one thing that they could go off and do, what would you want them to do today?
Is, if you are guilty of this, and you may not be, is get over the fact that learning is about education.
Yeah.
Shift your focus, and that learning is just about getting better at stuff. You could also say that if you just focus on getting better at stuff, sometimes you don't even need to worry about learning itself. But
yes.
At least learning is about getting better at stuff, and there are many, many ways of doing that. One of which only is something like school, adult school. And I think that mindset shift is so empowering, I think, to people. That's the one thing I would say.
Yeah, perfect. Because I think, like so many things in life, it's actually quite straightforward, and this stuff because you can see it around you. You can see what people need, and basic things that will help them. And if we're not careful, we can get caught up, like you say, in education and thinking about what we need to spend loads of money on. But choose the right thing, choose it carefully, invest in the right tools, but base it on what you know as a good manager. You're talking to your people, you're aware, You've got your eyes open, it. You just need to leverage all those good things about your general management, I think, and you will be that leader of learning.
Whatever you do on the weekend, you use all those kind of things.
It's true, isn't it? Yeah, we do so much natural learning with communities of practice that we are members of, the fun we have, all the little personal hacks that we use. And it's easy to forget those and to just think back about which manual do I need to buy for this person, or which course do I send them on. Not always necessary. So
indeed,
choose wisely. Trust in yourself as a manager, but also ask for help, because that's why Mindtools is there. We've got lots of products that people can benefit from, we think, and we'd love you to try them out. We'll put links to lots of our relevant resources in the show notes today. For example, we've got the Manager Skills Assessment, a diagnostic tool that focuses on 12 key manager skills, and it helps managers understand their strengths, uncover their development areas, and take action with confidence. All built on research, and it's got clear steps to improvement. It also helps you to understand the spread of abilities and learning needs across your manager population, the people we've been talking about today. Plus, there's the Mindtools Manager Skill Builder, 36 targeted courses covering all the 12 essential skills, tailored to meet the unique needs of every manager. And it's adaptive learning, so it personalizes each pathway. Find out more in the show notes or at mindtools.com. You can find out more about Carl. We'll put a link to you there as well in the notes, Carl. People can find out about the good work that you do. But many thanks today. It's been really fascinating getting your insights from both angles, really, from the manager side as well as from the lofty L&D team side. It seems a bit less lofty. You seem a bit closer to us now, so that's good. We've got to know you today, which has been excellent, and I'm sure we'll speak to you again. I will be back next week with another episode of Pain Points to give the Mindtools community access to another top expert, reducing the pain and releasing the positivity at work. That's the plan, at least. See if we do it again next week. for now. From Carl and me and the Pain Points podcast, for this week, it's goodbye.
Yes, thanks, Jonathan. Goodbye from me.